We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And Tom, I'm so much more comfortable this week. It thankfully it rained
down there.
It rained a little bit in Vancouver. It got to under 20 degrees, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, I have sprung back to life." It is miraculous. I cannot live in the heat. I don't know what I'm going to do. The whole world's getting hotter no matter where you go. But
I got up at 5:15 a.m. to go cycling, and when I left at 6:10, I looked at the weather, and it said it was 81 degrees outside and 93% humidity.
Yeah, It's not going to...
I didn't dare look at the heat index and what the heat index was, but it was probably like 95 or something like that.
It's not going to stay like this here in Vancouver, but I am definitely going to luxuriate in it and appreciate it while it is here, this cooler, colder weather.
I could use some cooler temperatures. I'll be
Wetter
honest
weather.
with you. I could use that.
Yeah.
All right, let's just get into it.
Let's just get into it.
I'm like completely discombobulated this morning. I cycled for the first time in a week, and I'm like, my hamstrings are killing me. I know I'm going to be sitting in this purgatorial chair for the next 2 hours. Like, I keep telling my wife we need a new office chair. She's like, "Why do you have an office chair?" I'm like, "It squeaks, so I can't use it for the podcast, number one. And number two, it's not all that comfortable."
Right.
Both of the chairs we have were either hand-me-down or we literally found them on the side of the road.
I mean, the problem is this is not a problem that can be fixed. There are no other office chairs in existence.
There is none. No, there's not.
No amount of money can solve this problem.
I know you guys are like, "Oh, Tom's just joking about being cheap." I am not. I am not joking about being cheap. There is no way that this household is going to get another chair until one of these chairs literally falls apart. Like, I cannot convince anybody that we need one.
I mean, even if don't get a new chair.
I've dropped hints for my birthday, for Father's Day, for Christmas. I'm like, it'd be nice if I had a new chair. What do you need a new chair for? I'm like, swing and a miss.
Even if you don't get a new chair, there are these less expensive portable things called cushions that could be purchased for a lesser price and moved wherever you need them.
That just seems like I should just buy a new chair. If I'm going to spend money on a cushion, just buy the chair. Except I can't buy the chair, so I'm not spending money on a cushion. Let's be reasonable. I know. I'm not saying it makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it makes sense.
I realize I don't have a doctorate. A recommendation like that has to come from a doctor.
Well, I have my PhD from Facebook just like everybody else does.
That's right.
I'm a molecular biologist, and I know virology, and I'm also a statistician. I'm actually a statistician. I mean, I'm not. I'm a research psychologist who took a bunch of stats in graduate school, but, most of what I've learned I got from Facebook, just like everybody
great.
else. And I'm also an expert on the Middle East, especially Afghanistan. I know everything.
Oh, gee. We are not going to get into that.
Everybody's real mad. I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot of anger going on. And I'm going to give everybody who's listening to this podcast, whoever you are, men, women, children, whoever you are out there who happens to accidentally hear my voice, if you are super angry about everything that's going on in the world right now, I give you permission to step away from social media for like a week. Because that's where my wife and I are. We're just like, we're not going to look at it anymore.
Right.
We're just going to have to take a break.
Yeah.
Just cool down. Pretend you're on vacation. And just don't, the world's going to do whatever it's going to do in the next week.
You,
just
as
stop paying attention.
Individual, there are a handful of individuals who can make impactful differences right now, but the majority of us cannot.
That's right.
Impactful differences to the world.
I didn't turn on Facebook at all yesterday. At all. Or any of the other social media. I didn't even listen to the radio yesterday, and I was so productive. Yeah. I was like the most productive I've been in weeks because I wasn't like scrolling through stories going, "Oh my God, what have we done now?" What has somebody said now? So, all right, this is not a political podcast.
It is definitely
political
not.
If you get very angry about amplifiers, in which case you and I are about to have some serious disagreements. But this is a podcast about AV. It's Actually, we answer your home theater and AV questions every week. So if you want your question answered on this podcast by two people that don't have PhDs in these things, but also didn't get all their knowledge from Facebook, then you can send those questions to question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @firstreflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. But if you want your question answered, you should send it to question@avrant.com.
You definitely should. Yes, please and thank you. Question@avrant.com, the email address. That is the place to send your questions to get them onto the podcast and answered by Tom and Rob.
All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you can support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you could do that is by going to patreon.com/avrantpodcast, where you can sign up to become a contributing listener every month. Patreon will take some money from you and give most of it to us, a minimum of $1. So $1 a month, $12 a year for the, what is it, 52 times 2, 104 hours minimum.
Yeah.
Of our voices a year. What is that divided by 12? I don't think I can do that. So, so I don't know how many dollars that works out to be, but it's not very many per hour. Where you're not breaking the bank over there. So we want to thank our 128 patrons over at patreon.com, including Daniel and Marc, who is called the Wood Whisperer.
Yep.
That sounds like something I would have said, but I don't remember this person because my memory is bad.
He's a frequent listener and contributor to the HT guys, so I've definitely heard Marc's emails. The Wood Whisperer over there. He and Ara both do woodworking, so they chat quite a bit. So yes, he is familiar to our home theater podcast audience. So yes, 128 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Greatly appreciate the financial support. And Daniel and Marc, thank you both for being two of them.
Yes. Well, thanks. We got some people sending some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during a global pandemic, which seems to be worsening by the day. So we've got notes of gratitude from Ted, who says he's been a listener since 2014. Jorge is what I'm going with, but it could be George.
I'm quite sure. No, I'm pretty sure that's Jorge.
Yeah, Jorge. I love saying Jorge. It's like one of my favorite names to say. I don't know why it is, but it just feels so good saying Jorge. It's just this. I don't know. Jorge, Jack, Marc, who took the time to reach out to Rob regarding editing and rewriting emails versus reading them as is, and his experiences with that on his own podcast and live woodworking show. Okay. That's the Marc. Thank you, Marc.
Thewoodwhisperer.com for anyone who wants to check that out. Yep.
All right, knock yourself out. Shannon J, who shared some more anime suggestions for Tom after Tom mentioned Fist of the North Star. I do love my anime suggestions. That's always good. Gurinder enjoyed our comments about moving someone else's speakers at an Airbnb. He also recalls how 13 years ago he was at a hotel with nice HD TVs, but they were connected via composite cables. He actually went to a local store, and that's it. They had component or HDMI cables so they could fix the TV at his hotel. They just looked at him like he was crazy. So Bertrand has listened for over 200 episodes in less than a year now. So, Bertrand, you win.
That's pretty darn close. 2 a day? Is that what he's doing?
You are listening to my voice more than my wife is willing to listen to my voice. She will interrupt me and tell me to shut up if I talk that much around her 200 episodes worth of podcasts, and that's just not going to happen. So it's Ted, Jorge, Jack, Marc, Shannon, Jay, Gurinder, and Bertrand. So thank you very much for those notes of gratitude.
Yes, indeed. I shall repeat the names: Ted, Jorge, Jack, Marc, Shannon, Jay, Gurinder, and Bertrand. Thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude and the notes of encouragement. They are greatly appreciated. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
That's right. From the news, we've got no word yet on new Denon and Marantz receiver models for 2021. They're probably trying to undercut whatever price Yamaha's paying for the boards right now. Just like, please sell them to us instead. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with HDMI right now, but I'm telling you, they're printing gold over there. They're printing it. But in the meantime, their 2020 8K models, the one with a single HDMI 2.1 input, have had a running change implemented in their manufacturing. Forbes has reported that any Denon or Marantz 8K models that were manufactured after May 2021 have an updated HDMI 2.1 board in them that works with the Xbox Series X and the newest graphics cards straight out of the box. No SPK. Why is that not a speaker? SPK 618. Why? Why would they waste that
I don't know.
stupid model number on a HDMI box when they could have made it into a speaker? It says speaker. Anyways, no SPK 618 adapter kit needed. If you get one of these newly manufactured units and enter its serial number into the SPK 618 registration website, you'll be informed that you don't need the adapter and it's not a speaker. They'll tell you that too. You're good to go already. Still only one HDMI 2.1 input though. Well, okay, so in retrospect, when I was complaining that they should have had their box had more than one 2.1 HDMI 2.1, now it makes a little bit more sense that they were going to make this running change going forward. So maybe I'll back off a little bit on my criticism of Denon and Marantz for that. Since if they kind of knew that's the direction they were going, they certainly didn't show that with any of us. So if you're shopping, you want to make sure you're getting one of these units. You'll want to look at the serial number. If it ends in the 70001, 70,001 or higher, that's one of the new ones. So that's how, I mean, that's going to make online shopping a little bit more.
Yeah, that's going to be
You're
difficult.
You're going to want to go to Best Buy for that.
For the sort of people who will have heard about this news, which is a small number of people, and I'm sure retailers are thankful for that much. But yes, out of our small number, that is definitely going to be a bit of a headache, because I am certain that anybody who is buying a Denon and Marantz right now and listening to this podcast and finding out about it, they're going to be the sort of person who's going to want to make sure they get the new one, because there is, at present, a 6-month wait on those SPK.
Right. Somebody asked me recently
boxes.
how long it took, because you got yours in a couple of weeks, right?
Well, mine was a little bit slow. Mine was about 5 weeks from the time I registered to the time I received it. Some of the people I was talking to on Twitter, they got theirs within about 2-3 weeks at first. But I mean, right on their own website, where you go to register for the SPK 618 adapter box, it tells you there's going to be a 6-month wait. So it's not like they're trying to hide that. They're saying that straight up. So therefore, if you are someone buying an 8K Denon and Marantz receiver right now, it makes all the sense in the world. You'd want to get one of the ones that's manufactured after May 2021. And yes, if you can get a hold of the serial number, then you're looking for a 70001 or higher at the end of the serial number there, and that'll let you just use it straight out of the box with an Xbox Series X. Yeah, that's that part. People are speculating that Denon and Marantz, if they are going to make an announcement of new models, that will probably come in October. That seems to be the scuttlebutt out there, that's when that's going to happen. So if you have waited this long and you are not in dire need of a new receiver right this second, and you know you want to stick with Denon and Marantz, then we are a couple of months away from likely knowing what the next models will be.
Doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to recommend them, though.
No, who knows? If they still only have one HDMI 2.1 input, I am quite ready to switch over to Onkyo. I might switch over to Onkyo anyway as my top recommendation. What they're offering right now seems pretty darn good, but they won't be available until October, but at least they've announced them already.
Right. We shall see. Ned might just say they announced them and they're also shipping right away. It's stuff that they do, you know. TCL announced some new 2021 5 Series and 6 Series TV models, and the model numbers are here to confuse you, so let's see if we can sort it out. So the 2020 R635 series remains in the lineup, so that's whatever. 4K mini LEDs, quantum dots, and 160 zones, but HDMI 2.0 only with Roku. All right, so then that was the R635.
That's
now,
right.
The new 2021 R646.
Yup.
I don't know why they didn't just go 746. You might as well. But anyways, 646 series is a 4K mini LED quantum dots, but it's now got 240 zones and 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and Google TV.
Yeah.
So the prices are $950, $1,300, $1,800 for the 55, 65, and 75 inch sizes. That puts them right in line price-wise with the Hisense U8G series that offers very similar specs, but with Android TV as the interface.
Yep.
It's the same company, though.
I know.
It's the same company. It's Google. Google makes Android.
But since the Hisense U8G series was a little bit disappointing in that primarily it's the way it handles HDR. It doesn't handle HDR accurately, the Hisense U8G series. so far, barring any strange change from TCL, because so far TCL year on year has done a very good job showing HDR accurately. So given that the prices are very similar and the specs are extremely similar, the R646, this is the brand new 2021 4K 6 series from TCL, that looks like it might be a winner for one step above entry level. You've got the full array local dimming, you've got quantum dots, you've got high peak brightness, you got all the things, and 2 HDMI 2.1 ports now.
Right. But hold your horses. Along with the R646 series, they have the R648 series because no one's ever going to see the 8 and the 6.
That's right.
Printed in itty-bitty print on the side of a card there. The 648 is 8K, clearly, with the 8 at the end, because the other one's a 6, because that's clearly 4K. 648 is 8K with 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs. It runs Roku.
Yep.
So the only way you'll know the difference between these things, you'll have to look at the operating system and go, oh, look, it says Google. It must be the 646. 65 and 75 inches only, $2,200 and $3,000 respectively. So, I mean, how many local zones of dimming and crap do they have? They have infinite.
No, it's several hundred. It's mini LEDs for the backlights of the 648 8K series. Yes.
All right. And then there's the new R546 series. Rob's starting to bold out the numbers that are different so that I won't get confused because he knows I'm gonna. So we went from the 646 to the 648 to the 546.
Yes, this is the 5
so this
series.
one's got to be worse, right?
Yeah, this is
it's got to be worse. Okay. So this is 4K, local dimming with 60 zones, but HDMI 2.0 only. The big change is that they run Google TV now instead of Roku. So if you want Roku, the 20...
You got to go with the 2020s or the 8K. The 2020s or the 8K run Roku.
All right. Then can I just talk to somebody at TCL right now about this crap? Pick an operating system and stick with it, you nerds.
Well, it looks like they're transitioning over to Google because that 8K series actually came out a little while ago. So at the time, TCL was all Roku. But now it looks like they're transitioning over to Google TV because the brand new 6 series, the 646, and the brand new 5 series, the 546, they are the newest ones, and they use Google TV as the interface now.
I don't know which one of those I would hate the most. Like, what's the worst? Android? Is Android the worst? I feel like the Android should be the worst. I've used Roku before. I've used Roku before.
Yeah.
And this is what happens constantly with people online. They're like, I've had Roku forever, and I bought an Apple TV 4K, and I hate the interface. I'm like, you don't hate it. You just don't know where anything is.
Yeah.
But once you figure out where everything is, you're going to be fine with it. It's just like when I went from the Xbox One, whatever I had, Xbox One to the Xbox, whatever that
Series
brick is, Series X,
yeah.
whatever it is. And then the Harmony remote guide button no longer did what the guide button did. And I was like so mad. I'm like, wouldn't it pop up all my little apps so I could go to the apps? And I was like, I had to go through like 3 screens to get to it and finally reprogrammed the remote. Now I'm like, that's fine. I just needed that button to work. I need one button to work properly, and that was it. Anyways, this is all dumb. I'm mad at this whole thing. All right, so the 20. I don't even know. I'm confused now. The 546 series, the entry level with Google TV, but it's new. 60 zones, 4K, HDMI 2.0.
Yeah,
it is 55 inches, 65 inches, 75 inches for $6,500. I'm sorry. $6,500. Jeez, that's a really $650, $900, and $1,300.
That's
so
right.
55, 65, 75, 650, 900, 1,300. So that's priced lower than the Hisense U7G, which is much easier to remember than any of this garbage. But the U7G has 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs, so that's still the best option for gamers at the lowest price.
Yeah. Okay. And if you desperately want to keep Roku and essentially identical specs to this new 5 series, then the 2020 R535 series is still in the lineup. They are still making and selling those. The prices are the same. The size range is the same. The specs are all the same, but it runs Roku instead of Google TV. So in the 5 series, you have your choice of operating system without really any differences between 2020 versus 2021.
I never want to speak of this again.
All right.
I never want to.
We made it so clear, Tom.
I want to make sure that we pick one that we're going to recommend and never recommend another one, so I don't have to remember any of these stupid numbers.
The cheap one we're recommending, if you need the lowest price, is going to be a Hisense.
646.
It's going to be the Hisense U7G. That's the least expensive one that we're going to recommend. And one step up from that, we're probably going to go with the TCL R646. Those are the two you need to remember. Hisense, cheapest. TCL, one step up.
Already forgot. All right, via Karl. Criterion is going to release some Ultra HD Blu-ray titles, 6 movies. Citizen Kane. Fell asleep. Couldn't get through it. Sorry. I actually watched it in class right after. I had a movie class, a theater class, a movie theater. I don't know, movie something. I thought it was going to be fun. It wasn't. It was Citizen Kane forever, I felt like. And
but Tom,
no matter what I said, I was wrong. And
Citizen Kane is the Citizen Kane of movies.
I understand. I have watched shows about why Citizen Kane is important, and I recognize that it is a very important, groundbreaking for its time.
Yes,
movie that did remarkable things. Cinematography, all of that stuff, just amazing. And to think of how young Orson Welles was when he did that movie, it's just insane. It's nuts, right? I understand. It's still boring. It's so boring. I'm sorry. I can't get invested in that. Menace to Society didn't see it. The Piano won't see it because it was directed by that guy who likes to with the children, right? Won't see that movie. Mulholland Drive saw it. Didn't quite get it because it's David Lynch, but liked it. Okay. I think I liked that one. The Red Shoes. Is David Duchovny in that? Or is that something else?
I don't know The Red Shoes. I don't know that one.
I don't know that I've heard of this one. And A Hard Day's Night, which I don't think I've seen.
Oh, okay.
So those are the ones. A Hard Day's Night. Which one is that about? Do you remember what that is about?
No. I look terrible right now, but I don't recall. I don't think I've seen it. I know the title. I've definitely heard of the title. I don't think I've actually seen it.
I like David Lynch. I'll watch David Lynch stuff because I think he's my kind of weird. But yeah. And Menace to Society, I think, I remember it coming out and being a big deal, and I remember not seeing it. So there we go. Some of them will have Dolby Vision HDR. Some of them will have Atmos, but Criterion didn't give specifics just yet. Boy, I don't know about adding Atmos to some of these things, but okay. Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, people have been eagerly awaiting releases from Criterion. They're like, why doesn't Criterion have any Ultra HD Blu-rays? It's been Blu-ray only up until this point. So finally, they're getting on board, and here come the first 6 titles. Yeah.
We started watching, I think we talked about this already, but we started watching The Fifth Element. I only have it on, I have it on DVD, but it's what did they call the good ones? It's
Super Bit?
Super Bit, the Super Bit. I have it on Super Bit.
That was DVD, wasn't it? Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I've been watching that, and I keep watching it thinking, this would be really good in Blu-ray. It'd be even better in Ultra HD Blu-ray with some Atmos in it, because this is a good movie. Some comments here. Ted recommends an article over at Pro Tools Expert, which Pro Tools is about the audio mixing software not about Power Tools.
No.
So when I first read it, I was like, what? In which a producer shares his experience and thoughts on Apple spatial audio and creating Dolby Atmos for music releases. He notes the importance of monitoring the mixes on both a speaker setup, minimum 7.1.4, he says, with a 9.2.6 being closer to ideal if you can manage it, and also via headphones, typically AirPods Pro or Max. Okay, so that's the ones that spatial audio works with. So
that's right.
It's when you have to use. So there's nothing like there's a lot of options out there. He also details how Apple's spatial audio at present is all lossy and uses a 24-bit 48 kilohertz sampling rate. More bits in the compressed file are allocated to the left, center, right, and surround channels. So if you isolate just the overhead speakers, they can sound pretty compressed, data compressed that is, all by themselves. One of the other interesting tidbits is that Apple mandates that the Atmos stream must be delivered alongside a synchronized stereo-only stream, so you can always toggle back and forth on the fly. And there are more technical details about the mixing process for anyone who would like to read them. Oh, read. It sounded like it was a podcast there for a second. So there's an article. Yeah.
Article.
Okay,
yep. Yeah, so thank you to Ted for sending that over. Yeah, it gets pretty down into the technical details of making this spatial audio for Apple, which is at present relying on Dolby Atmos Atmos for music. He's speculating that one of the reasons maybe Apple decided to market it as spatial audio is behind the scenes, they are working on their own 3D audio immersive format, apparently. So he's like, yeah, maybe they'll transition away from Dolby Atmos at some point to their own thing, and therefore they can keep calling it spatial audio without having to license Dolby Atmos. And that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and at that point, all the Apple fans will be like, look, they invented 3D audio.
That's right. Nobody did
just
it before.
like they invented face recognition like 7 years after Google on their Pixel phones, but whatever. All right, last week, whatever. These are questions. Jeremy in France. That's right, we were going to do Jeremy's question. He's en français. Jeremy only recently purchased and downloaded the Audyssey Editor app on his iPhone. Compared to running Audyssey directly on the AV receiver, are the changes made when using the app the same? If they're different, which is better? Are the changes made when using the app the same? What changes? Is he talking about the change to the curve? Because you can't do that on the not app. So
well, I think he's just mainly asking
everything else should be the same.
If he runs it in the app versus just running it directly off the AV receiver, is there a big difference?
Shouldn't be any difference, right?
Yeah, if you don't make any changes to the target curve within the Audyssey Editor app, then they're the same. They're starting from the same place. It's just that if you use the Audyssey Editor app, you have the option to manually make changes to the target curve, which you cannot do.
You can take that notch out and you can change the curve.
Yeah, that's actually one
if you
of
want
his
to change.
questions.
Yeah. Oh, is it coming up? Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
that's coming up. But you cannot make manual changes to the target curve if you just run it in the AV receiver. You plug the mic in, do the setup on screen coming straight from the AV receiver, no app attached. You can't make any manual changes to the target curve that way. So you have to use the app to do that. So obviously, once you do that, once you make changes in the app and you change what the target curve is going to be, now there could be differences between having run it in the AV receiver versus running in the app, but they start from the same place.
Yes, I thought about this a long time, this whole editor app, because for a long time they had Audyssey Pro, which would allow a custom installer to come in with a piece of, I think another piece of gear along with.
Well, it was a USB microphone.
Well, they had all that stuff in their computer, and they had software on it that they could make all these changes for you. But then my thought is, custom installers weren't buying it or weren't getting trained on it or didn't think it had any value, and they just like, well, let's just put it in the app and give it to everybody, for $20.
Well, I mean,
I think it's a great idea.
A much cheaper, more accessible way to give you manual control. And one thing to be aware of is if you do make changes in the app, manually make changes to the target curve, then that only applies if you're in your AV receiver. After you've done the setup and you've loaded what you've done from the Audyssey Editor app into the AV receiver, if you then go into the AV receiver and toggle between the Audyssey target curve and the flat target curve, because you can still make that change, you can switch that anytime you want in the AV receiver, the changes you made in the app only apply to the Audyssey setting. So if you set the target curve to Audyssey, that will load in all the changes that you made in the editor app. The flat target curve never changes. That just remains a flat target curve. No matter what you do, the Audyssey Editor app doesn't affect the flat curve.
There you go. So after running Audyssey setup via the app, he went into his receiver's menu and manually changed the crossover settings for his focal in-wall speakers. The auto setup had put his front speakers to 40 and his other speakers to 60 hertz. He manually changed all those to 80. He also disabled dynamic volume and dynamic EQ. Wouldn't have done that last one, but okay. But there was another setting in the app that never appeared before when he was just using the AV receiver, mid-range compensation. It's enabled for all speakers by default. Should he touch that or leave it alone? That's the little notch that we were talking about.
That is the notch at 2 kilohertz, which looks like a wider dip in the frequency response that they show you on the graph in the app. But in reality, it is much closer to a notch filter. And that's the one where Tom and I have toggled back and forth between having the mid-range compensation on and having the mid-range compensation off. And we've played sweeps and we've listened to content and we've never been able to tell without looking at the graph. Just
I
by
really
our
don't
ears,
know.
we can't
I don't
tell.
understand why they have it, to be honest with you.
Because
somebody decided it was an important thing to have, but I don't know. Maybe for other speakers. Maybe for lesser speakers.
Well,
for speakers that don't cross over well between the tweeter and the mid-range. this is an important thing to have. But for if you have decent speakers, which just about everybody listens to this podcast does, that thing's like does nothing.
Yeah, no, they're like, there are speakers out there where the crossover between the woofer and the tweeter is nothing but a single capacitor. It's a 6 decibel per octave filter on only one side, and that is what they're calling a crossover. And when you do that, you get all kinds of intermodulation distortion problems. And they say, well, this is common enough that by default they threw in this 2 kilohertz notch to fix those types of speakers. And like we say, if your speaker has a competent, good crossover, you don't hear it. You don't hear that notch. So that's why by default, that's what they've left it as, because it doesn't really have any deleterious effects on good speakers, but it helps some bad speakers. So by default, they leave it there. Now, people saw it in the graph and freaked out, so they're like, well, we got to give people a way to turn it off so that you don't see the dip at 2 kilohertz anymore in the graph. So they went ahead and let you do that in the Audyssey Editor App, which is the only place you're ever going to see the dip is in the Audyssey Editor's own graph. So they're like, okay, you can turn it off. But yeah, we've never been able to hear a difference. So honestly, go ahead and give it a try. We're not going to stop you, but we wouldn't anticipate you hearing a difference. And then the only other thing was in the settings that you mentioned, we agree with, if it has by default set your crossovers lower than 80 hertz, we recommend raising that to 80 hertz. That almost always is beneficial. But yeah, we would leave dynamic EQ turned on. We would turn dynamic volume off. Dynamic volume is the one that dynamically compresses everything. It makes everything close to the same volume. That's what it's trying to do. Loud things get quieter, things get louder. But dynamic EQ is the one where if you are not listening at full reference volume, your master volume dial is not turned up to 0 dB, instead you have it at -10 or -20 or something, which is very common. At that point, it will not sound linear to your ears anymore. It'll sound, if you play to sweep everything at the same volume level, if you're at master, your master volume is all the way up at reference, it's at 0, then subjectively everything's going to sound about even. But once you turn the volume dial down, our hearing is not linear. You'll lose a bunch of the deep bass before you lose the mid-range and treble because of the way we hear. Dynamic EQ levels that back out. It keeps everything audible even when you turn the master volume dial down. We really like that, so we normally recommend keeping dynamic EQ turned on.
That's right. So his setup is in a living room. He fully expects I'm not sure. I've read the sentence like 5 times while you were talking.
So I think it's supposed to be it to be. I think that's what I meant.
Okay. He fully expects it to be echoey in there right now.
Yeah.
He's got a plan in place to work on the room's acoustics, but there'll never be a fully dedicated theater. He's seeing frequency response graphs via the Audyssey Editor app for the first time. He feels like less of a beginner, having listened to us for a while. But if he's completely honest, he doesn't fully understand what the graphs ought to be telling him. When we look at them, are we able to glean anything about his room and indications about what he should focus on in terms of room treatments within the limits of what he'll be able to do in the living room? I will tell you right now, more is better. Without scrolling down. If you have none is not the right number.
He definitely has more than none. Yeah.
So let's look at these right here.
Sure, yeah. Let's go through them and see if there's anything that we notice. Yeah.
So the front left, the green is the before and the red is the after?
Yeah, well, the red is the prediction. The red is not an actual after measurement. That is the target they're aiming for. That's what Audyssey is saying. We think through our EQ system, this is what we can hit. But the green is an actual measurement. The green is the before measurement.
Nice suck out at 2K. I mean, jeez. that suck out at 2K is that's pretty good. That's a good one.
But we're seeing a rise in the bass down to 100 hertz. That is rising
we would
up.
Expect.
That's normal, especially in a small room, which is what he has.
Yeah.
Or actually, no. His room is quite large. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's a living room, so yeah.
No, his room is quite large.
But it's still reverberant.
Yeah. And he has on-wall speakers. So it's not unusual for on-wall speakers to have this rise in the bass because they have a whole bunch of boundary gain from being on the wall.
Right.
Yeah.
Front right looks very similar.
Very similar. Yep.
Yeah.
Center, pretty similar, really.
Pretty similar
in terms of, like, we're just talking about overall shape, what in general is happening in these graphs. So as we go from front left to front right to center, we're seeing a pretty similar, if you just drew a trend line, if you smoothed that all out and drew a trend line, those are looking pretty similar.
Yeah, they get more and more bass. Well, I mean, the center has a bit higher peaks, and then the right has a little bit higher peaks in the bass, but not enough where they're not basically the same shape.
Yeah. Onto the
Okay,
surrounds.
and then we get to the surrounds,
which are actually looking pretty flat overall, really.
They look all right.
Yeah.
Boy, 2K is not your friend, though, my friend.
Although the surround right doesn't really have much of that. Yeah.
I can see that. Surround right is better. Yes, it's better. Top front left is looking pretty good. 2K is not your friend.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking Atmos speakers, so some of that is like on purpose. Yeah. That's a bit of the Atmos thing to make things sound like they're coming from overhead. So these are the top fronts.
Those all look the same.
Top rears, all very similar.
That's good. I mean, in general, so think about it this way. If you have all the same problems in all of your speakers, you can theoretically correct over across the board for those things. So if you see the predictive line here, what you're seeing is essentially them lowering the volume of all the peaks down to where the nulls are, where the lower points are. Not exactly. They're doing a little bit of boosting, but for the most part, they're lowering everything down so it's a more flat line. Now, where they run into trouble is when they get to that 2K point and there's like, well,
also that is the mid-range compensation that's right in there. So that dip that we're seeing in the target curve on all of them, the red curve, if you're looking on YouTube or following along on Flickr, that is the mid-range compensation, which, like we say, looks like a much wider dip at 2 kilohertz in the target graph than it is in reality. In reality, it's much closer to a notch. I'm not sure why they chose to visualize it that way, but that is still there. But the before measurements, roll off at
10. Yeah, I mean, I think everything looks really quite okay, considering.
What this indicates to me is that we are seeing, especially across your front three, a pretty general rise in the bass, and that is quite EQable. Honestly, I'm not really worried about that. You could sort of rely on EQ. However, we know that in his room, it's quite large, it's fairly reverberant. He had some things done architecturally to the ceiling to help a little bit, but the rest of the room is really quite reflective. So if what you're finding is that even after the EQ is applied, it still just sounds a bit reverberant. It sounds a bit boomy, which could be the case because EQ can only change what happens to what comes out of the speaker. After it comes out of the speaker, the room takes over. And if the room reverberates that sound, even if it was lowered when it initially came out of the speaker's face, it's still going to reverberate around the room. And it still might sound a bit boomy. So we're indicating that, right out of the speaker, the direct line from the speaker to the microphone, we have this rise in the bass, which, like we say, not surprising. But what that indicates is if you are hearing some reverberation in the room and you want to take care of that with passive acoustic treatments, you want some thick treatments. That is what you need. You want thick treatments. Also, if you want to get up and maybe address some of that 2 kilohertz that you're seeing across the board in all of your speakers, then you just want just straight absorption. You don't want absorption that also has a membrane on it. You don't really even want absorption that also has diffusers on it. You just want straight absorption panels, but you need ones that are thick. Like if you just get 2-inch thick panels, no air gap behind them, just 2 inches thick, you're not really going to address what's going on in your room. That's what the before graphs here are indicating to us. This is really saying, I mean, you're probably not going to want to hear this, but it really means you need 6-inch thick panels. Either 6 inches thick and no air gap, or like 4 inches of insulation with a 2-inch air gap. Those will work approximately the same. But that'll get you nice, effective passive treatment down to 125 hertz, and then a little bit lower than that. And that's where you need it. Right? So the indication is don't just go putting a bunch of 1-inch and 2-inch panels in your room. It's not going to really address what you need in your room. What you need are, I know you're not going to want to hear it in your living room, but you need 6-inch thick panels. So that's what that tells us.
Okay. Subwoofers. He's got dual SVS SB2000 Pro subs. We might recall that he worked with a contractor to install all the home theater gear, and they wound up hearing the best seat-to-seat consistency with one sub on the front wall and the other sub on the side wall, but his wife strongly prefers having both subs up front. He didn't actually say where they are now or at least he didn't say where they were when he took the Audyssey Editor App measurement. So, what? Okay, is it both subs together?
No, this is again before and after. So this is both subs playing together, and we're seeing a before measurement in green, and a red is what they're predicting they can fix. And believe me, that is not the line that is actually going to come out after the equalization is applied. The red flat line, they're not going to be able to do that with EQ. You can't fill in this big dip.
Whatever that is. I don't know. What is that?
Minus 10 decibel dip at about 40 hertz. It's right around 40 hertz. The very edge of the graph is 20 hertz, so the next line is 30, and then 40 is where you've got this big dip. Now, I have my suspicions that both subs are up at the front of the room at this point, and this response would not be surprising if that's the case. If both subs are at the front of the room right now having this cancellation that's going on at 40 hertz would not be super surprising. Now, so, I mean, he says, assume that the subs are not going to physically move from where they are. Now, again, we don't know exactly where they are, but either they're both at the front of the room or right now one is at the front as one is on the side. And assuming...
You're sitting in the null. It's like the seat-to-seat consistency might be that the whole couch is in the null, which would be okay. But, you're sitting in the null. You're missing a lot of bass below 40 hertz. Yeah. Essentially.
So, I mean, the best we can do if you are not able to physically reposition your subwoofers. Now, if this is the response that's being measured with both subs at the front of the room, if you're able to try it the way that you and your installer first had it, with one sub at the front and one sub on the side, and you measure and you see a much better response than this, you don't have this big suck out, then that is... Well, it's fuel for your fire. It's still not going to convince your wife, I'm sure, but I know it'll give you that knowledge.
It should squiggly line like that, where this at the top from 100 hertz or so, it should squiggly line all the way down to 20. It should be closer to the top, not this big
if we
canyon.
Just drew a trend line through it, we want it to be pretty close to a flat line, not have a very obvious dip at 40 hertz, which you do right now. Now, the thing is, if this is the response you're getting with one sub at the front of the room and one sub at the side of the room, if nothing's changed, go ahead and give it a try with both of them at the front of them, because he has an open living room. Sometimes things are unpredictable, and sometimes it actually works okay. So whatever you have right now, switch it to the other configuration and measure again and see if you get a better trend line, one that doesn't have a big...
Switch it to all the configurations that you have options of.
Oh, yes. He really said he pretty much just has the two options. Either.
Well, I understand, but
as far as
everybody
positions.
says that until you say, but you're missing all the bass below 40 hertz, and they're like, I paid for 20 hertz.
Right.
I paid for 20 hertz.
He actually has 20 hertz. That's the thing. He's got got like 30 hertz and 20 hertz. It's 40 hertz and 50 hertz, which unfortunately is like the kick drum, the stuff that thumps you in the chest. That's what's missing right now. So let's assume...
I bet it's playing in the bathroom, though.
Right. Let's assume he does the best he can, right? Wherever the subs can live, he gets it as good as it can, but he still has some kind of dip or something like that. I'm going to point you to my 12-step guide for setting up dual subwoofers. You are exactly who that 12-step guide is for, because he does have SVS subwoofers, so he has fully variable phase. He can fully adjust the phase, and if you go through that 12-step guide...
He's got the Pro, so he can do it from his couch, too.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So if you go through that 12-step guide, it'll get you as good as you can. I can't promise it's going to be perfect. Don't try for perfect, but you should be able to improve upon it a little bit at least, and then let Audyssey do its thing. It'll get you as good as you're able to do within the constraints you have, and we have to live in the real world. We're fine with it.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, if your wife really, really wants them up front, put them both up front, and then spend a couple of weekends playing sweeps until she wants to divorce you. But to get this thing right, and you say, honey, this is where you want them to be?
That's
This
right.
is what it takes.
Yep.
This is what we have to go through. I'm willing to suffer all these sweeps for you, honey. I'm suffering these sweeps for you, honey. That's what's happening here. And then she will not love you any more than she already did, and she may resent you quite a bit. But, it'll be worth it, because in your heart, you'll be right. And that's the important part.
Yes.
Andrew.
I have a good sleep on the couch with your rightness.
I should be a marriage counselor.
That's right.
I really should.
That's what AVRant really is, marriage
That's
advice.
what we are. Let me fix your marriage. One terrible sweep at a time. Andrew's current home theater setup is in his living room. Hey, how do you feel about sweeps for a couple of weekends?
Oh, he's done it. Andrew's done it.
So even though he has acoustically treated it's not completely dedicated space, he's thinking he'd like to have a room that's dedicated to being a theater, but the only available room in his house would be the mechanical room with his hot water heater and furnace. Would we recommend trying to convert his mechanical room into a dedicated home theater? We absolutely have people who have done this, right?
Yes.
There was the guy who had the water heater up at the front of his theater.
Sure did.
That he blocked in with a false wall.
Yeah, we had the other fellow with the townhouse basement room where reframed it so that he could use essentially a portion of it as a dedicated theater room, and then the hot water heater and the air conditioner and all that was repartitioned into its own much smaller section. So there's
no reason why you can't do this.
Well, unless the room itself and the layout of where the hot water heater and the furnace are just not conducive to blocking them off. Because what I wouldn't do is have the hot water heater and the furnace still like in the room with you.
Right.
Like, we're talking about building walls around that, and you do have to be careful and considerate of those devices because those need proper ventilation.
Sure.
Those need proper air return and airflow. You've got to make sure that you're not doing anything that's against code. Bring a contractor in, spend a little bit money on a estimate from a contractor, explain what it is that you want to do, make sure you're going to be within code. So we don't know the layout of your mechanical room.
I am becoming more and more a fan of the small home theater. These big, massive home theater rooms that people want to have, 2 rows of seats, 3 rows of seats with a bar at the back and a gaming table. Man,
if the point is to entertain several people, then that's what they want to go for.
I don't want other people in my house. COVID's ruined me for people. I didn't like people that much to begin with, and now I definitely don't want them over here. Like, just stay away. So I'm like, get me a 65, 75-inch flat panel screen. Get me a couple of chairs. My friend's daughter just went away to college, and he immediately moved into her room and made an office out of it. I mean, he didn't wait till her bed was cool before he did it. And I was like, so jealous. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I want to get a small couch. I want to get a small room. I want to get a flat panel TV. I want to get rid of this heater that is my projector. I want to be able to stand up and have my, be able to stand up in the room and not have my head blocking the light off the projector. I'm telling you. Everything's cheaper. You can buy smaller speakers. You can buy smaller subs. It'll sound just as good. Carve yourself out a little space inside of this, in between your hot water heater and your HVAC, and just build yourself this little theater that's just for you, just for you and maybe one other person that you kind of like.
Yes. So anyway, Andrew, a lot depends because we don't know the dimensions, we don't know the layout. So it's not something where we're going to say no, absolutely not, no matter what. This could be done, but this will be a renovation. This isn't going to just be like the mechanical room is the way it is, and you put up some drywall and the hot water heater is still in the room with you. We wouldn't do it that way. We would be talking partition walls. So, but some mechanical rooms are really quite spacious, to be honest. Like, they're meant to be both mechanical room and storage, right? Or sometimes that's where your washer and dryer are, or something like that too.
Sure.
So a lot depends, but it could be done conceivably.
And so the way my house is built, where my home theater is basically behind my garage, essentially. And so there's a bathroom, and then which was part of the house initially, or actually no, that was built into the garage as well. The garage was built in front of the bathroom. So the wall between my home theater and the bathroom is cinder block, and then we have the small bathroom. It's very thin bathroom, and then there's the washer dryer is just on the other side of that wall. And man, I can have that thing going like crazy, and I never hear it in here at all. So yes, you won't have a cinder block wall between these two things, but if you do just some of the simpler,
like staggered stud. We'd do at least a staggered stud wall there.
It's not. You're probably not going to hear that stuff as long as you don't have air return into your home theater. So it's doable, but you have to, like Rob said, without knowing the exact layout. It's kind of hard to say.
Because some mechanical rooms are not that large, and you might be like, oh, there's room in here for a recliner and a TV, but it's like, but you're going to be like sitting right next to your hot water heater, and we wouldn't do that.
Right. We wouldn't do that. So in his current living room setup, Andrew upgraded his front 3 speakers to the new Paradigm Premier series, including the huge Premier 600C center, which is
a tower turned on its side.
It's a tower turning on its side when putting the tweeter in the mid-range in the center.
Yep.
So, yeah. It is a whopper. His surrounds are still his monitor series V5 ADP 190s. Another thing that just rolls off the tongue. Those use Paradigm's adaptive dipole configuration where the two angled tweeters are out of phase, but the two angled woofers are in phase. He doesn't have any complaints about the way they sound right now, but he's also never used monopole surround speakers. So he doesn't know what the difference might be. It's 5.2.4 configuration. His surrounds are directly to the sides of his main seats and slightly above seated ear level. He's considering the SVS Prime Elevation speakers to replace them. Do we think switching to monopole surrounds would make a worthwhile difference, or would it be better to save that money and continue using the ADP 190s? Any new surround speakers would need to be flush mounted to the side walls. He figures the Prime Elevations should reasonably match the Paradigm Premier speakers up front in terms of neutrality and timbre. And their angled design will aim them directly at the main listening position. So do nothing, get the Prime Elevations, or get something else, and if so, what? I am a big believer that you should do nothing. To be honest with you, I mean, I can get behind you doing. If you said I really want to have surrounds, new surround speakers or whatever. I mean, this is not the preferred design, and this is not one of the designs I would have chosen regardless. Because having the tweeters out of phase and the woofers in phase, it just. I don't know what the heck they were doing with that thing. I mean, nobody else did that, and there's a reason no one else did it. So, I mean. They're going for that more diffuse sound. That's fine, but you only have a 5-point
and
system.
They are straight to his sides. That's actually a big consideration, in my opinion, in this particular
because
setup.
of the dipole nature of the tweeters, that's exactly where you'd want them to be.
Yes.
But so that's good.
Yeah.
So,
because my thinking here is that if you end up switching to monopole speakers of some kind as your surrounds, but they have to go exactly where your current surrounds are. They can't go any farther back. Then I don't really want monopole surround speakers that are straight to my sides if I don't have room for any surround back speakers. Like, you have no speakers putting any sound behind you whatsoever. You just have them straight to the sides and like aiming straight at your ears from 90 degrees to the side. That's not my preferred setup for surround speakers. I want them a little bit behind me and a little bit elevated and not even really aimed down at me. I want them kind of firing just a little bit above my head, flat across at each other. So for those
there's
reasons,
a couple of considerations here.
Yeah.
So what Rob is saying, and I can get behind this because I've had surround speakers that were essentially directly behind my couch with no space between, almost no space between the couch and the wall. I mean, there was space. There's about 1.5 feet, but they were on stands directly behind the couch, so they were very close to being directly to our sides. And at the center of the couch, it was fine.
Sure.
It was the size of the couch that kind of sucked. So I can get behind what Rob's saying, which is if you can't relocate these speakers, then I wouldn't consider monopoles. In general, even if you could do all the things Rob's asking for, and you position them the way he's saying, and you didn't get the elevations, you just got like the prime satellites and just had them firing straight out or whatever. I don't know that you would, at the end of the day, go, wow, that was a great expenditure of money I just made. I don't know that the difference would be enough.
Yeah, because I actually kind of like having the more diffuse surround speaker when it's all the things you mentioned. They are 90 degrees to my sides. My side walls are not that far away from, like, the side seats of my couch. Maybe the seat right in the middle of the couch is fine, like Tom said, but the side seats of the couch, the side walls are not that far away. The speakers are at 90 degrees. They're just a little bit elevated like that, and I don't have any surround back speakers. That's actually the scenario where I like a more diffuse surround speaker, which is exactly what you already have. So if the positioning of your surround speaker is not going to change, my opinion on this scenario is I'd keep what you have. I would do nothing. I'd put that money towards something else. If you are saying, oh, you know what, if I do get monopole surrounds, they still need to go flush on the wall, but I can move them back so they're at like the 100 or 110 degree azimuth from my angle facing straight forward, plus minus 110 or 100 degrees like that. They're a little bit behind me. Then I can get more on board with it. I probably, I just don't like having surround speakers angled down at me. I prefer to have them firing a little bit above so that no matter what, they're a little bit diffuse. I prefer that. So going with the prime satellites, totally a way to do that. Or AVRant as well. Their Novus online on-wall speakers, they could totally do this and match quite nicely in neutrality and timbre to your paradigms. So those would be the options I'd look at if you can move them. If you can't move them, I'd keep what you have.
Yeah, I say that even if you can move them, at the end of the day, you might not go, well, this was totally worth it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, I think that's where my whenever somebody asks me a question like that, should I upgrade my speakers? My first thought is, what do they have, and what are they trying to upgrade them to, and is there going to be a difference based on everything else that's going on in the space? And I guess there would be a difference. I think you would hear it. I just don't know that you would feel it would be all that worthwhile. I guess it depends on how much money you got for reselling those paradigms. So he might be in need of a 25-foot HDMI cable. What's our go-to for that these days? I mean, it's Blue Jeans or Monoprice, I guess. Those would be my guess. What do we got, Rob?
I mean, Blue Jeans actually doesn't have any ultra high speed HDMI cables yet. I'm sure they will in fairly short order, but
they're trying to get the garden hose out because they haven't found the right garden hose sheath for them. But they do like cables that don't bend. For sure.
They're not certified yet. So and in his scenario with an OLED and all that, I would get an ultra high speed HDMI cable. That's for sure. So 25 feet, it's an interesting thing. There actually is a ultra high speed certified, the full certification, hologram and QR code and all that, that is 23 feet. That is the longest one I've come across. That's a normal copper HDMI cable, ultra high speed certified. So that is from Zeskit. We've mentioned them before. $55 over at Amazon for the 23 foot length. So if that's long enough, then there is the option, and that is in wall rated. For the 23 foot. Like now, if it has to be 25 feet or longer, you actually need a little bit more than that, then we are going to be going to Monoprice, and we're going to be going to their optical, because there is nothing longer in ultra high speed certified than 23 feet right now. So we'd be going to their optical series. The 30 foot length, they have a 20 foot and a 30 foot, not a 25. So this is 23 isn't going to do it. You're going to go up to 30 feet, but it's $113. So if you can spare the 2 feet, it's half the price to get the copper one from Zeskit.
All right. He does not have Ethernet running to every room in his house, but he does have coax. Is there an easy way to convert Ethernet to coax, or should he hire an electrician and run Cat 6 everywhere? First of all, I want to say you do not need to hire an electrician for Cat 6. You absolutely do not. It's you can run it yourself. You can buy kits at Home Depot. They come in like packs of 2 and 4s and 6s and stuff like that, which is like a wall unit that you can plug your in-room coax to, and it's like the world's simplest thing to do. I've done it 1,000 times.
The only thing is actually snaking all the wire through the walls, which isn't always super simple, depending on the construction of your house and where you want to run it. That is true.
I will say that, if you don't want to crawl around your attic or figure out how to fish it around the outside of your house and get it back into your house,
or basement or whatever you need to do,
basement or whatever you need. I understand that. You don't need an electrician for that either. You need somebody who doesn't mind getting dirty and has a little bit of ability to do it. It's really quite easy to terminate Ethernet yourself.
Yeah, that's not the problem.
And it's just getting in there. That said, I'm sure there's something that does it.
Yes.
The only thing I would say about coax before we go too much further, you may have an outlet in every room of your house, but figuring out where that thing connects to someplace else and how many splitters it may go through. Because I know my house in Jacksonville, when we lived there, I was having all kinds of problems with internet and my cable channels dropping out. And I had to call the cable company out, and they basically came out and it's like, dude, there's 30 splitters outside your house. I mean, it's ridiculous. And every one of them loses a little bit of signal as it goes through. So, just because you have an outlet for a coax inside or in your room doesn't mean it's going to be easy to figure out where that goes, or that it's not going to it's going to have a direct shot or go through 10 splitters on the way. So just a word of warning there. But go ahead, what you got, Rob?
Sure, yeah. Just in terms of converting Ethernet to coax, you definitely can. It's a standard called MoCA. And yeah, the one that's definitely recommended is Motorola's adapter. So it's an Ethernet network adapter to coax. Now, you do need one on either end. So if you're talking about, okay, I've got my cable modem, maybe it's in the basement, and that connects to one cable inlet that then feeds all my other rooms, well, you can have the one Mocha adapter down by your modem, but then you're going to need another Mocha adapter at every termination in all the other rooms to convert the coax back into Ethernet, right? So they're $70 each. It's not a super cheap proposition if you have many rooms. Now, if you just need to do it to one room, that's not too bad. But if you have many rooms, yeah, they're $70 a piece. But yeah, Mocha
it's cheaper to run that Ethernet, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. Now you're getting into, even with the labor costs of someone else doing it for you, if it's many rooms, then running the category cable might be easier.
All right. Chad's got a basement room that he'd like to renovate into a dedicated home theater. He'd like to go nearly whole hog. He doesn't need total sound isolation. It's fine if a little bit of muffled sound reaches the other part of the house. I like how people say that, like, that makes it easier for us to give you the recommendations we're going to give you, but whatever. Inside the theater, he'd like it to be very quiet. The current dimensions with unfinished walls are 10.5 by 16.5. The door will be on the right side wall, pretty much in the middle. He just wants a single row of seats, but his vision is to apply all of the optimized setup practices he's read about. That means he wants his center to be identical to his front, left, and right, and at the same height, so he's going to need a false wall and an acoustically transparent screen. He wants to use 4 subwoofers for the very best uniformity and linearity if possible. He wants front wides. Rob, This is your fault. This is your fault. You have done this to this poor man. It's only 10.5 foot. He doesn't have room for front wides. Full 9.4.4 speaker configuration. He's willing to basically black out the entire room for very best contrast. Total budget for everything, room construction included, is about $30,000, although he's got a healthy amount of wiggle room if needed. So he's showing 3 recliners, 16.5 deep and 10.5 wide, which I really think does not give you enough room for wides. But let's go on. Starting with the room itself, what steps can you take in terms of soundproofing construction that will eat up the least amount of floor space? 2 of the walls are concrete foundation. Would normal resilient channels use the least amount of space? Should he use 2 layers of drywall with green glue? If he does the 2 layers of drywall, would that be enough on its own to just use normal 2x4 framing and nothing else? You don't want this to go in the rest of your house. You're going to have to isolate those walls.
It's more that he doesn't want sound coming into the theater.
The rest of them. What's that?
Oh, sorry, we had a Skype glitch. I'm saying it's more about not having the sound coming into the theater as well. Basically, through experience, particularly of listeners who've written in, doing the resilient channels or the sound clips and hat channels, it's not worth it, and it takes up more space than you think it would, and it's a lot more hassle, and then you can't really hang anything on your walls when you're done. What is much simpler, faster, easier, and still almost as effective is just making sure that on the foundation walls that you have, you are going to put framing in front of those, okay? You're not going to do the very thinnest thing, which would just be strapping that is connected directly to the concrete foundation. You are actually going to erect, it could even be 2x3. You can get away with 2x3 because all it needs to hold is the drywall. So it doesn't have to be structural 2x4. You can get away with 2x3s. You're going to want a 1-inch gap between the concrete foundation and the 2x3 framing. But for the foundation walls, you can do that. That's sufficient to decouple things. And then for the party walls, for the left wall and the back wall that are party walls to the rest of the house, I wouldn't just do standard 2x4 framing and nothing else. I would do a staggered stud wall. So that's going to be, a 2x6 base plate and top plate, and then 2x4 studs, and the 2x4 studs are staggered. So the drywall on one side, outside of your theater, that's attached to a certain set of studs, and then the drywall on the inside of theater is attached to a different set of studs. The same studs never touch both drywall on both sides. That's the idea. And when you work out how much space is lost that way, like theoretically resilient channels would be a tiny bit less floor space, but it's just such a hassle to do resilient channels. It's so easy to short circuit them and make them ineffective. And with resilient channels, you can't hang anything on those walls, whereas staggered stud you can, and it's easier, faster construction on top of it. Now, then if you want to make sure that it really is very quiet inside your theater and very little sound gets out of your theater, 2 layers of drywall with green glue, that is going to be your best defense at that point. That is damping a lot of the sound before it gets into the studs at all, and then if it does get into the studs, the 2 studs on either side of the party walls are separated. You probably don't need 2 layers of drywall and green glue on the foundation walls. That probably isn't necessary. So we're talking about just the 2 party walls where you're going to do staggered studs, 2 layers of drywall, green glue, and then the ceiling as well. The ceiling is where, if you're not hanging anything from the ceiling, resilient channel for the ceiling makes a lot of sense. That gets you separated from the floor joist, the structure of the building above. That takes up the least amount of ceiling height by doing a resilient channel. If you want to block that sound, that's 2 layers of drywall with green glue on the ceiling as well. So that
then you want to put that rubber patty stuff at on the floor as well to float that floor a little bit.
Rubber underlayment on the floor for sure. If this is just a cement floor in the basement, you're gonna want to do the dimpled plastic over that first with a layer of OSB or plywood. Give yourself a little bit of a subfloor with a gap under it. That's mainly for moisture. We want to make sure moisture doesn't become a problem here. So the dimpled plastic over, if this is just exposed cement floor, then OSB or plywood subfloor, and then the rubberized mat layer on top of that, and that takes care of what you need on the floor in a basement.
All right. So since he's envisioning the 3 identical front speakers, all vertical, all at the same height, how does he go about building a false wall for his acoustically transparent screen? Well, it would be easiest if you picked your speakers first, because then inside your, not easiest, but I mean, I think it would be easiest, so that you could then... first of all, bookshelf speakers, and I would put I would just build basically shelves, inside of your false wall, so that you could put your speakers on them without having to put buy stands or anything like that. Just it's an acoustically transparent screen and an acoustically transparent fabric all around the screen. Yeah. And just build shelves.
The actual construction, I mean, it's just 2x4s. It's like you're building the frame for another wall. It's just that you're not putting drywall on those 2x4s.
That's
you
right.
erect a 2x4 frame inside of your finished theater. You erect a 2x4 frame, but then you just cover that 2x4 frame with acoustically transparent fabric outside of your screen, and then the screen itself where the screen goes. So you want to arrange...
give yourself some way to get back there. Just make sure that you don't completely cover it with fabric or build a door.
And they've got the systems for the stretched fabric where it's kind of like horizontal rails that you just like push the fabric into to hold it. So that's a very easy way to throw the acoustically transparent fabric up there. So it's just kind of like sort of rubberized rails that go horizontally, and you just push your fabric into there, and that's what holds it and stretches it taut.
All right. So which acoustically transparent screen should he get? So looking at his little image here, it's a 16.5-foot room. He's going to set it a little bit further back than halfway, it looks like.
Yeah,
so
he said he wanted all the things, including surround back. So I'm going to want you to have 4 feet from the back wall to the back of those recliners.
So that puts you at about 6 feet from the back wall for your head, and then 10
possibly.
feet up, 10.5 feet to the front wall, but you're going to have 2 feet in from that.
Possibly.
So that, for your false wall with your speakers and everything else, because you're going to want to put your subwoofers back there. Mm-hmm. So you got to consider that as well. Mm-hmm. So even with the smaller, sealed SVS subs or whatever you're going to end up getting, you're going to have to fit them back there somehow. So the wall will have to go in front of those subs as well. Now you're saying 7 feet from an acoustically transparent screen, so that gets you pretty close.
Yeah, I could see you getting as far as 9 feet. I think that's doable. With the wiggle room of where the backs of your seats to the back wall goes. I think you can get 9 feet eyes to screen once you're reclined. I think if you're not reclined, you're at 8 feet eyes to screen. I think once you're fully reclined, maybe you're 9 feet eyes to screen. So
But
that's
you know
what we're
that still
looking
gets you close enough where we're going to worry about weave and stuff like that. So
I think there's only one choice here, honestly.
Right. I think I saw what your choice was, and I agree, and that's why I'm going through all this because there are some cheaper options out there for acoustically transparent, but their weaves aren't as tight as the one that Rob's going to recommend. And I have seen those screens in person, and if you sit far enough away from them, like a reasonable distance away from them, you can't see the weave. It just doesn't show up.
Greater than 12 feet.
You're sitting close enough where it could, and unless you want everybody to look like a little textured, you're going to have to get something a little bit nicer. And since you're going whole hog anyways, I don't think we have a problem recommending this.
He's got the budget to do this, and that is Seymour AV's Center Stage Ultra Fine, Center Stage UF. I think that's really the only choice of material. Since you want to have false wall and things that will be behind the screen, go ahead and get the double layer that has the black backing. So it's the black backing and the Center Stage UF Ultra Fine screen on the front. Now, as for the choice of frame, you've got a number of options because one of the things that it's coming up with this projector, but he wants the black bars on CinemaScope movies. He's going 16:9, hooray, 16:9 screen. But he wants the black bars to be really, really black, close to OLED black if he can. Well, one way you can get there is with masking. Then they're going to be completely black. And there's a few different ways. Seymour AV is a great place to go for this because you've got options. One option would actually to have a motorized screen. You can have the acoustically transparent on motorized, including motorized with masking. Seymour AV offers that. So I'm going to say that if you want like a really big field of view, like bigger than I would want, greater than 50-degree field of view, but that's what some people want. 120 inches diagonal is going to get you that in this room size. Why
would he? Oh, motorized masking, not motorized screen.
No, I mean, he could do motorized screen because maybe he wants access to behind that false wall. So you could have a screen that's motorized. I'm not sure what his total plans are, but that is a dual roller system. So there's one roller that takes care of the screen itself, and then another roller that takes care of the mask that comes across the top. When it's CinemaScope time, the screen rolls up a little bit to raise the bottom of the screen, and the mask comes down and goes across the top to mask you off to CinemaScope. $3,200 is what you're looking at for that dual roller motorized setup with the Center Stage UF screen. And like I say, I would probably be going for like 110 inches in this room size, but 120 is possible. So you're right around in that price range. Now, if you're going fixed frame, you've got two options. If you want the fancy one, which is you push a button and the masks motorize themselves in on a fixed screen, on a fixed frame, then Seymour AV does have that. That is their, what is that called? Proscenium motorized masking frames. All right, so you're looking at, if you're on the smaller end of the scale, 110 inches, you're looking at around $3,700 up to $4,300 if you're going for the 120-inch diagonal size. So it's actually a bit more expensive than the fully motorized screen. That's another reason you might consider the motorized screen, which is tensioned. Their motorized screens are tensioned as well. So if you want everything push button and motorized, the motorized drop-down screen with the motorized masking on the dual rollers is actually less expensive than the fixed proscenium frame with the motorized masking. But if you just want the lowest price, but you still want masking, Seymour AV offers manual masking. They snap up there with magnets. It's very fast and easy to put it up there, but it is manual. You have to walk up with the mask and put it up there yourself, but it goes in with magnets. There, you're talking about $2,000. So out of all those options, that is definitely the least expensive. That's their premier frame with magnet masking. But regardless, Seymour AV Center Stage UF fabric.
All right. Which projector should he get? He has the JVC NX7 in mind. He wants the contrast and any black bars to be as deep as possible. So is JVC still the best way to go on that front? He's thinking like the projector plus screen costs around about $10,000 or less. So that means you can't get the NX9.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
That's an $18,000 projector.
I'm thinking that you should wait a little
bit. For all the specs of the new laser models that we just found out last week are in fact coming out this year.
This is another one of those things where you're like, you kind of, since he's planning everything from scratch, he already kind of knows how big of a screen he's going to want to get and that sort of thing. buy the projector last.
Well, I
like
mean, the thing
dead
is,
last.
he hasn't built the room yet, so you definitely have some time. It's going to take you some time to build the room. So the thing, what we do know, I mean, almost certainly, is that the chassis of the brand new laser JVC projectors that'll be coming out at the end of this year, it looks to be identical to the current NX series chassis. So the odds of a drastically different throw ratio or anything like that, like if you're talking about planning where you're going to mount the projector, I think you can go ahead and do that. You know, I don't foresee any problems because JVC always gives you a wide zoom range and lots of motorized lens shift. So if you planned out the mount for an NX series JVC projector, and then you're like, oh, you know what, the lasers are here now, and according to all the specs and reviews, they are better. We don't know if they will be, but if that's the case, and you want to do that, I don't foresee any problem swapping one for the other. So don't order an NX7 right now. I would plan on getting a JVC. If you want the deepest black levels, it's going to be a JVC. So I would go ahead and make your plans as far as projector mounting position and all that and screen size that you want to go for. Go ahead and plan it with the JVC NX series in mind, and if the lasers end up affordable and better, I foresee no problem swapping out.
He asked, what about the projector's fan noise? Will he need to construct a hush box? Well, if you're in a very dark, light-controlled room like you're planning on being, you could definitely put in eco mode, which will cut down on the fan noise quite a bit. Hush box seems excessive to me. I'm looking at your picture here and wondering if you could actually put the projector outside the room. We
don't know what's on the other side of that back wall. We don't know.
Because that's what I would do. As someone who sits like 6 feet away, I mean, as the crow flies from my projector, and I'm in a small room that is like controlled, and then the eco mode or whatever is on and all that other stuff, I can still hear it. Sure. I hear it. I don't hear it often, and I don't notice it almost ever. But when the projector comes on and I hear things going and stuff like that, and I pay attention, you can hear it.
Yeah, it is not literal silence, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, do I think a hush box and all the things that go along with the hush box would be necessary? I don't. I don't think the cost rise it would. If you could just put it in another room and then have like a nice clean window to shine it through,
right? The other side of that back wall.
Yeah, but other than that, I think I would be fine. I don't know how loud the NX7 is, but
they're quiet. They're quiet. Like, I would not recommend it. I would not suggest it to the vast majority of people. But if you know yourself well enough to know that you want literal silence, then you would need to look at a hush box. That's the way I'll put it. Because for almost everybody out there, I would say with a JVC projector, you don't need a hush box. But if you are like, any sound whatsoever, I need literal silence, then you'll need a hush box. That's how I'll put it.
I don't know. So what do we recommend for his 13 speakers and 4 subs? He's already familiar with the Sierra Towers. Towers.
Well, he already has some in a different setup, so he's just familiar
I know, okay. So he's thinking his surrounds definitely need to be quite slim and mounted on the walls, just due to the small dimensions of the room. Super loud output shouldn't be necessary in the small room size, but he genuinely listens at full reference volume, so he doesn't want anything that could potentially get damaged. At this distance, nothing's getting damaged.
Everything, especially in the sort of price range he's looking at, everything is fine on that front.
Yeah. So what are our picks? I mean, he didn't give us a budget for these exactly.
Well, I mean, he's got an overall budget, and we know about $10,000 of that is being taken up by the projector and screen. So
right,
yeah.
So and then the room itself is going to take up quite a bit. I would
imagine.
I don't even know if he has any budget left for speakers at this point. After $10,000 for the projector and the screen and the room. I mean, he didn't say recliners, and I mean, no one ever thinks about like carpet and
there's plenty of costs in there, lighting, all that stuff.
I mean, when I think flat, I think Legend, but those are going to probably be out of your price range for
Legend. Do you mean Legacy?
Legacy, sorry.
Legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
also
that's,
think
that's
the
getting
RBHs, the Ultra
Yeah.
ones, whatever they're called.
Well, not even the Ultras. You could go with the Signature series from RBH.
I don't know. Yeah, whatever. The ones that I'm thinking of are the ones.
Yeah.
That's the ones. I'm looking at them now. Yeah, that's them.
Yeah, RBH, you could definitely look at the Signature series. If you go with the dome tweeter version of the RBH Signature, that's $1,000 each. If you go with the folded ribbon tweeter version, those are $1,450 each. And I think that's doable in his price range. I'll always looking at 13 speakers in that. If you want to stick with Ascend, then you can definitely go like Sierra 2 EX up front, 3 of them identical. Those are $900 a piece. And then the Sierra Luna as your surrounds and surround backs, because those are on-wall, easy to mount, exact same tweeter as is in the Sierra 2 EX. So those are $575 each for the Lunas. So that's actually one of the less expensive options that we were looking at. Legacy audio is very expensive, but there's also Focal, the Focal 1000 series, which if you look them up, they show up as in-walls first, but they have optional frames to make them into on-walls, and they are a fully sealed cabinet either way. So even if you did them in-wall, it's a fully sealed cabinet. Like, it's not even a backer box. It's just already on there. It's a sealed cabinet. But then they have an optional frame you can put onto those to make them into on-walls. But those are up in the, if you go for the two-way model, that's $1,800 each, just for the two-way of the Focal 1000 series. If you go for the three-way...
The 1000 series?
1000 series, that's the IW6 something.
Oh, right. LCR 6.
Yeah. And then there's the even larger one, the three-way one. Those are $2,700 each. And now you're into legacy audio territory.
Utopia. There's a smaller one, too, the IW6 in-wall 6 customer.
Yeah, that's the one that's $1,800.
No, there's a 1000 in-wall LCR 6 and the 1000 in-wall 6, which is just... Oh, that's just a two-way? Is the $1,000 one?
That's right. That's the $1,800 one each. The three-way one is $2,700 each. They are pricey. So if you want to go less expensive than any of these, if that's what your budget ends up dictating by the end of this, AVRant is definitely a consideration. Up front, you could go with Veris Grand bookshelf speakers, 3 of those across the front, and then they have their Novus Slim on-wall speakers that'll match very nicely for an on-wall option. $360 each for the Novus on-wall, so that is definitely the least expensive of the ones we've mentioned.
Yeah. And again, I don't really see how you're putting I mean, I don't know what the angle is going to actually work out to be, but I don't see how you're getting the front wide speakers on wall or not.
Oh yeah, those can't be on
front
walls.
wall.
Yeah, those can't be on
be.
walls.
It won't be in the front wall either. It's the angles are such that they're going to be in the room. So you're going to have everything's going to be on the walls and everything else, except for your front wide speakers, which are going to be on stands.
Yes.
In the corners, basically, or a little bit in front of the corners there. So, maybe wire for it, and then don't buy them.
If you stuck with Ascend, you could definitely use Lunas there, because those will be very small, but they can just go on nice little stands or shelves. You could have shelves that are at the appropriate spot on the side walls, but you need to be able to angle your front wides if you have them.
I would like to say SVS would be a good, because I mean you could put
definitely could be
the Ultras up front. Behind 3 Ultra bookshelves up front. And then do the surrounds or the
satellites.
The satellites for the just about everything else. But they're not that. They're a rear ported speaker that's not flat. I mean, they're what, 6 inches deep or something like that.
They're not a truly on wall like 3-4 inch thick design like some of the others.
I mean, I'm not going to say they're not an option, but then you would have those satellite speakers. You could just put them everywhere, and including for your wide speakers if you decided in overheads and everything else. I mean, you could put them everywhere, so they're light and they're easy to place. And I've got mine jammed up against a wall, and never once did I think, oh my god, I'm blocking my port. So whatever, it's fine. Daniel says he feels like this might be a silly question. It is. I'm sorry, we won't answer it. Let's go on no, it's a really long question. I was trying to be funny, but this is sad now. But it's something he has wondered about, and when he's looked up videos or articles for an explanation, they've all been quite scientific and technical. He said, Tom's got the answer I need, because that guy doesn't do that. He just wants a simplistic explanation for the following. If you take any given driver and a speaker, let's use a 12-inch woofer and a sub as an example, then that is just a diaphragm that is moving back and forth, correct? So it vibrates the air. If it vibrates slowly back and forth, that's a low note, correct? And if it vibrates quickly, that's a high note. So changing how fast the driver is vibrating back and forth changes the frequency of the note that is playing, correct?
All correct so far.
Yes, that you are dead on, sir. That's what. And the reason why tweeters are small is because it's easier to move them back and forth really quick.
They got to move real fast.
They got to move 10,000 times a second or more.
20,000 times a second at the very top.
At the very top for the stuff you can't hear anyways. But don't worry, they make ultra tweeters for that. So now let's say you turn up the volume dial. That means more watts are being sent to the driver, correct? So how does that actually make the sound get louder? You've got more watts flowing into the voice coil, but still the same size driver interacting with the same amount of air. So what changes to make the sound get louder? It's just something that he wants to understand, but never quite clicked for him yet. The word you're looking for is excursion. It's excursion. So if you just tap the top of water and you see a little ripple go out, that's a soft sound. Now, if you smack a rock into that water and there's big waves going out, those waves may have the same number of waves per second as it goes out, but the height of the wave makes it louder.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So your subwoofer or your tweeter or your mid-range, whatever woofer it is, they have that, the surround around it. And whenever we talk about subwoofers and being high excursion drivers, this means that they can push way out and suck way back in, which means they can get louder. They can move more air. So the more air that's moving towards your face, the louder that sound is. The less air that's moving towards your face, the softer that sound is. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if you were close to a speaker, it sounds louder. When you get further away, what has changed? It's not the number of waves that are hitting you, it's the amplitude of those waves that are hitting you. And eventually those waves stop, just kind of dissipate off into nothing, and that's when you get no sound.
Yeah, we're talking about displacement of air. So the surface area, the amount of air that it's interacting just on the face of the driver, that is the same. But if the driver moves farther, it has displaced more air, just like pushing harder and farther into the surface of water. You have displaced more of the water than if you just barely touch the surface of the water and it barely ripples. You've interacted with the same surface area but displaced much less water if it barely moves, and displaced more. And it's the same in air. They're both fluids. So I'm going to just show some graphs and run through them quickly, just so that some of the things that...
I can't see any of this.
Well,
so,
they're in there. You can follow along right there.
No, they're
in the
not.
album. Yeah, graphs.
Oh,
right
the
there.
flip. I got it. I'm not clicking on this.
So just so
Right,
when we talk about amplitude, if we are talking about sine waves. Sine waves are just the nice smooth up and down wave that's going on there. But if you just look at a normal sine wave graph, the height of the waves is the amplitude, and then going across, we're normally looking at time. Well, sometimes it helps to just rotate that 90 degrees and see that wave vertically, because if you imagine that that's the face of the driver, imagine that wave is just like scrolling upward and the face of the driver is just following the back and forth movement. That's exactly what the driver is doing. It's moving back and forth analogous to that wave. That is why it is an analog wave. It is an analog of the movement. That's an electrical wave. We're seeing it as a drawn graph, and the movement of the driver, they're all analogous to one another. That's where that term comes from. So if we look at, I've just shown a 10 hertz wave here. I just used Audacity and generated a 10 hertz wave. This is 1 second of a 10 hertz wave. And you can just count. If you go up and then down to the bottom and then back to the middle, that's 1 cycle, and 10 cycles fits perfectly into 1 second. That's a 10 hertz wave. If we go to a 20 hertz wave, there's exactly 20 cycles that go in there. A 50 hertz wave, all the things are getting closer together, but the heights of all of these waves that I generated are all the same. So these are all the same volume, but they're just different frequencies. They're different notes. They're getting higher and higher as they're getting closer and closer together. Now, I've shown a sweep. This is 10 hertz up to 50 hertz. The height stays the same, the volume stayed the same the whole time, but you see they're farther apart when they start and they get closer and closer together. And that's a sweep. That's going from 10 hertz up to 50 hertz, or the reverse. Going down that way. But if we go back to the original 10 hertz wave, if we see it with lower height, lower amplitude, it's the same sound, but it's quieter. And if we go to higher amplitude, higher height, it's the same sound, but louder. So that's the way to visualize it there. And if we turn that vertical, again, we can imagine we're starting there, and just picture that driver is moving forward and back exactly as much as these vertical graphs that we're showing you. And then if it's moving less, just height, same frequency, but not moving as much, or same frequency, but moving a lot more, that's your changes in volume. So here's a wave that is not only increasing in frequency, but it's decreasing in volume. Big, tall waves farther apart at the beginning, closer together, shorter waves at the end means it was a sweep that got higher in frequency, but lower in volume as it went along. And then the reverse. A sweep that started quiet at a low frequency, got higher in frequency and louder in volume as it went on. So that's what we're seeing in that graph. If we go to a complex wave, this is something you might see. This is something a speaker might actually be playing. Once again, the woofer is actually just following that line. That is how a single woofer plays multiple frequencies simultaneously. A whole bunch of instruments, a whole bunch of voices, all playing at the same time. They all can be broken down to individual sine waves. You can do that mathematically and have it's just literally this wave plus this wave plus this wave ends up in this complex wave. That's how waves work. And if the driver literally follows the path of this wave, forward and back, sometimes farther, sometimes less, that is all your changes in frequency and loudness right there in that wave. And the driver is literally following that path. That is why it is analogous to that wave. There we go.
There you go. Very exciting. I can see it.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah. Let me scroll. I've lost my cursor. Daniel also wants to make sure he correctly understands crossovers, in particular, any filters that get applied to the dedicated low-frequency effects channels such as LPF for LFE, low-pass filter for LFE setting.
Yeah.
In terms of a general overview, when you set a crossover frequency for a given speaker channel, let's say you set 80 Hz crossover for your center channel, as an example, that basically means starting at 80 Hz, any sounds lower than that, which would have normally gone to the center speaker, they get rerouted and sent to the subwoofer instead. Does he have that right? No. Yes.
I mean, close.
Technically.
You're very close.
So it's not a brick wall. We want that's the thing that we all have to understand, is that there's a slope. So at 80 Hertz, your center and your subwoofer are basically playing together, probably the same, contributing just about as much.
Yeah, if you've set the crossover to be 80 Hertz, then the center speaker in this example is still playing 80 Hertz, but it's playing it 3 decibels quieter than the signal is actually saying to play it. And the subwoofer is also playing 80 Hertz. They're playing together at 80 Hertz, and they are crossing. Now, that actually continues gradually up all the way up to 160 Hertz, where up at 160 Hertz, the subwoofer basically isn't playing anything anymore, and the speaker is playing everything at 160 Hertz. And then down at 40 Hertz, the speaker is playing exceedingly little, and the subwoofer is playing almost all of it. So that's the crossover. And right where you set it is where they are both 3 decibels quieter than the signal. So when they play together, and they are not co-located, so if you don't want the speaker stacked on top of the subwoofer,
right? And that's where our room correction systems kind of come in. There is because they will detect that there's this unnatural boost because you have set you're using your subwoofers as stands for your front left and right speakers, and they'll say, well, when it's with the front, when these subwoofers are playing with these 2 speakers, it's essentially co-located. In fact, it's probably co-located to the center as well, because they are physically close enough that they are at those lower frequencies, they are in essence co-located because of the length of the sound wave. It's going to correct for that. But yes, if they were they were apart from each other, each one would play 3 decibels lower, because together as they're both playing the sound, they would add together to make 3 decibels more. But this question continues. The dedicated low frequency effects channel, if you set your AV receiver with all of your speakers set to small and the subwoofer set to on, then 100% of the LFE channel gets played by the subwoofer, correct?
That's correct.
And if that's the case, why would you ever want to set a crossover or filter on the dedicated LFE channel? Don't you just want everything in the LFE channel to be sent to the subwoofer unchanged?
Yes.
Yeah, you would. That's why the default for that is like 120 or 140 or something like that.
That's 120. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we don't ever touch that.
That's right.
We actually don't want it to be there at all. But no one listens to us.
That's right.
So if you got a friend over at Denon Marantz, Sound United, I don't know, Onkyo, whoever owns them these days, Yamaha, we'll be happy to tell them to take that setting out and just get rid of it. But
yeah, for the dedicated low frequency effects channel, with the assumption that all of your speakers have been set to small and you have at least one subwoofer, that dedicated low frequency effects channel, the 0.1 channel in your 5.1, 7.1, whatever it is 100% coming out of the subwoofer at that point with your speakers set up that way. And that is correct. And when that is the case, you don't want to touch the default setting on the low pass filter for the low frequency effects channel. That should remain at 120 hertz because that's as high as the signal goes. And you don't want to set it to 80, which I've seen people recommend doing that.
I don't know. Yeah. Reddit's a terrible place.
I wish that setting didn't even exist because it exists because there's the people who aren't using any bass management. They're just sending the full range signal out of the front, left and right pre-outs, and then that's going through a subwoofer and they're applying their own crossover. Or there's the people who are setting their front speakers to full range, to large, and now the bass is being duplicated, including the dedicated low frequency effects channel. It's being duplicated out of the front speakers, or in fact, any speakers that are set to large. It's being duplicated out of those speakers and the subwoofers, and sometimes some people think they can get a better result by altering the low pass filter on the low frequency effects channel. We don't want you to set up your speakers that way. We kind of wish the setting didn't exist. So you are on the right track, Daniel. Leave that setting alone. Leave it at 120. Don't touch the low frequency effects channel settings.
That's right. Jorge. And thank you, Jorge. You should write in every week so I can say your name. But don't really. But yes, you should. If you have 4 overhead speakers, we've explained why it's best to label them as front heights and rear heights, even if physically they're mounted where Dolby's diagrams would say to label them as top fronts and top rears. Mm-hmm. We've explained how front height, rear height labels work best for DTS-X and DTS Neural X, better than top front, top rear labels. And for Atmos and Dolby Surround Upmixer, it does no harm. All that sounds good to Jorge. Mm-hmm. He's played around with the different listening modes and upmixers on his Denon X4400H, and he's come to the conclusion that he likes the DTS Neural X upmixer the best. That's just his personal preference, and it's because it has more bass and puts more sounds into the overheads.
Sure.
Because that's exactly what it does.
And I am A-okay with that.
That's why I like it too. But he has a 5.2.4 configuration. His couch is basically against the back wall. His frontmost overhead speakers are high up on his front wall, so it seems natural to label them as front heights no matter what. But his rearmost overhead speakers are directly above his couch, and since that is against the back wall. So the obvious question, would it still be best to label those rear heights? Or does he stick with the labeling them top middles? Since he doesn't have any speakers physically behind him, what happens to the sounds that were supposed to come from directly behind him, surround backs, or overhead and behind rear heights? I have the exact same setup, except I'm not against a back wall. I just have my speakers over my head, and I would just set them as top middles because that's what they are. I mean, they're not close enough to call them anything else. So I would set them to top middles. And what should be happening in theory is that the Atmos or the Neural X upmixer should take your surround. He has a 5-point, right? Your surrounds
5.2.4. Yeah.
And your overheads, and using phase and other things, try to place those sounds behind you.
Right.
What they will actually do is probably just use the surrounds to do that. And
yeah, the easiest part to explain in this question is the sounds that would have come out of surround back speakers if you had them. Those just get played out of your surrounds. That is straight ahead. That's what happens. You don't lose those sounds. They don't disappear and you don't hear them whatsoever. They just get mixed into your surrounds, full stop. That one's pretty easy. It's a little bit harder to discern what exactly is going on with the overhead layer. DTS Neural X is set up to essentially work with front height and rear height. That's what it wants to work with. It tries to create phantom front height and phantom rear height speakers if you have not labeled your speakers as such, which is the very reason we say to label them as that. Even if physically that's not where they are in the diagrams, label them that way so it doesn't try to create phantom front heights and phantom rear heights. Now, if You have no surround back speakers, so it can't create phantom rear heights with those. That sound that would have gone to surround back speakers, as I just said, goes into your surrounds. So if it's trying to do any phantom effects between the overhead layer and the floor level layer, it's doing so with your surrounds and the speakers that are directly above you, which means that in all likelihood, if you went with some crazy upmix test tracks that I don't even know where to point you to get them. Maybe Josh Zyber can help you out because he's done the testing on this. But if you were to label them as rear heights, even though they're physically straight above you, I don't think you'd have any bad effects. Because again, as far as the way Atmos works, it just says, okay, am I left and right? Am I forward and back? Like, that's really all it does. So if you labeled the ones that are directly above you as rear heights, I don't think you'd suffer any ill effects. And it would make sure that with DTS, the sounds that are supposed to be, farther back are just discreetly played from the overhead speakers. There's no phantoming down into your surrounds. Right. So in a way, if you're willing to just give it a try, I think it might be worth a try. I wouldn't actually expect you to notice any type of big difference. I think leaving them as top middles, if you don't want to mess around with another, auto room correction setup or any of that, I think you're perfectly fine. But theoretically, labeling them as rear heights in all situations should give you the most discreet sound with no phantoming down into your floor level.
Okay. Jack, 2020 LG GX OLED versus 2021 LG C1 OLED, both at the exact same price. Which one is the better choice? I don't know.
All right. Well, to make this very simple, the better choice is A, if there were a price difference, the cheaper one. B, it's really all about the chassis. Because the G series, the Gallery series, that is the one that has the uniform thickness throughout the entire body. It's like 1.5 inches thick for the entire body, uniform from top to bottom, with an integrated wall mount, flush mount wall mount on the back of the G series, so that you screw that straight into the wall and then it actually kind of scissors back onto the wall, and it is as flat and as close to the wall as anything other than the W series wallpaper OLEDs. It is 1.5 inches off of that, or actually it might even be less than that. I mean, it's really thin. It's as thin as it can be, and it's the uniform thickness from top to bottom. The C series has the OLED design where it's really, really thin at the top, but then there's a butt on it. It's thicker at the bottom to house all the electronics. So it's not a uniform thickness from top to bottom. That's really the deciding factor. But these ones specifically, I'll want to point you over to Vincent Teo over at HD TV Test, because he's got the videos he's got one that's great. It's the C9 from 2019 versus the CX/GX, because the thing to know, in 2020, the CX and the GX, identical picture performance. The only difference was the chassis. And then those versus the C1. So he's got a video about that. And then he has one that is the G1 versus the G10. All right, so that's just the 2020 model versus the 2021 model. There are some technical differences with the new G1. All right, there are some technical differences where the G1 has the new Evo panels that are manufactured in Korea, and they can get a little bit brighter. It's possible to make them a little bit brighter, but unless outside of a side-by-side comparison, you will never notice the difference. In that G1 versus G10 comparison that Vincent Teo did, and he is a purist, and he goes by the measurements, and he's a professional calibrator, and he gets even more nitpicky than I do. He's like, get whichever one is cheaper. There's just not enough difference between them because the performance is so darn close. So really, that's what it boils down to. I would probably say, unless you really, really want the Gallery series chassis, I would go for the C1 just because it's newer, and every year LG refines their software a bit. When Vincent Teo got super nitpicky, he's like, yeah, coming from pure black to just above black in the shadows, every year they get a little bit better at that. Every year they refine that a little bit. Every year the black frame insertion gets a little bit better. Every year the motion processing gets a little bit better. So the C1 has all of those refinements over the G10. So if it's between the two of them and you don't care about the chassis, I'd get the newer C1. If you do care about the chassis, by all means get the G10, and do not worry that you're giving up barely anything in picture quality. The end.
There you go. So you'd like to use a Chromecast with Google TV as a streaming device. It comes with a USB cable and a power adapter to plug it into a wall. The instructions warn you that you should plug the Chromecast into a wall and not the TV's USB port for power, but of course not all USB ports are the same. Do the USB ports on the LG C1 or GX have enough juice to power the Chromecast? I have to be honest with you, I had no idea that was ever an issue. I have always used the USB port on the TV to power my Chromecast, and I've taken it to all sorts of Airbnbs and different places.
But do you have the new Chromecast with Google TV?
I don't. I have the old one.
Chromecast.
I have the old one, but it's never been an issue. I mean, this is certainly try it and you'll see, but I guess if you're choosing one between the other, I mean, I don't know.
But they did put that warning in there for a reason. The new Google Chromecast with Google TV, it does draw 5 volts, 1.5 amps, which is something that a power-specific USB 3.0 port can supply. Your regular USB 3.0 port can supply 5 volts at 0.9 amps, which is not enough. But there are the power-specific USB 3.0 ports that can deliver up to 1.5 amps. So technically, there are some USB ports out there that do have sufficient power, but the LG OLEDs don't have them. The LG OLEDs actually just have USB 2.0 ports, and those supply 5 volts at 0.5 amps. It is definitely not enough to power the Google TV, the Chromecast with Google TV. So their warning to actually plug it into the wall with the supplied wall wart is the correct advice. And yeah, that's the case with the Chromecast with Google TV.
All right, plug it into your receiver. Jack, appreciate our answer about running a power cord through a hole in the wall, as well as what type of in-wall HDMI cable you should run. Just to check, what about Ethernet cables? Does he need to look for a specific in-wall rating for those? I don't know that there's ever been an Ethernet cable that wasn't rated in-wall.
Yeah. So an actual category cable, right? Cat 5, Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 6a, any of those can all go in-wall. There are some that are rated for direct burial or outdoor use. Those have a separate rating for those specific purposes, but that's not what he's talking about. There are some of the, and I mean, you wouldn't buy these anyway because they're sketchy as all get out. Right. That refuse to label it as a category cable. It has no Cat 5 or Cat 6 or anything labeled on it. They just call it a patch cord. And they are like literal pennies, and they are super sketchy. And you, like I said, you probably wouldn't buy them.
You have to really try to find them. They're like in the dark depths of the dark web of Amazon.rs.
You gotta search for the sketchiest of the sketchy, and sometimes those are not. They don't have the proper jacket for in-wall. So as long as you get something that is properly labeled from an actual brand as a category cable of any type.
Actual brand. It's just not, it's not like Black Label.
It's fine to put those in the wall.
All right. Let's answer Infinite Gary, then we'll see how much time we have left after.
Oh, man. Barely got through any this week.
Well, it's your fault. Infinite Gary. A little more on mono listening, just in a theoretical sense. And theoretically, don't listen to mono stuff. How about theoretically that? Is there an approach to positioning and towing in a pair of stereo speakers that is considered to be the most advantageous for mono? For example, the equilateral triangle is often recommended for stereo positioning. I don't know why people are still recommending that, but they do. Is there a similar type of recommendation that would deliver the most natural and full-sounding mono, not just dead center phantom image with no width to it? It's so speaker dependent. I mean, it's what's their off-axis response? What's your room acoustics? I mean, I
mean, the
equilateral triangle is not terrible, not a terrible idea. I really don't think it's this one-size-fits-all thing that people think it is, because I see it where people are sitting like 10 feet away and the room is 10 feet wide, so they put the speakers in the corners, and I'm like, don't do that.
Indeed.
That's a terrible thing to do. So, because they're trying to follow this rule of equilateral triangle, whatever. Just, I think that you should place your speakers that makes sense for where you're sitting, not for how far away you are from them.
Within the Dolby recommendations, which could be plus or minus 22.5 degrees to either side, up to plus or minus 30 degrees to either side, which would create the equilateral triangle at that point. Or not necessarily. Yeah, it would. It would create the cool electronic if you were plus minus 30 degrees. But yeah, I mean, the ideal for mono is a single speaker.
30, yes.
Yeah. The ideal for mono is a single speaker. That's the
Which
ideal.
would create no width to it whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be a single point.
Unless
that's what mono is.
Unless you have a reverberant room. That, the room takes over and gives you a bunch of uncontrolled reflections, and that's what creates...
Which may or may not sound good.
Yeah, that's what creates the width. I mean, mono... Yeah. There's a reason we moved away from mono at some point.
All of the reasons, because it
there are
sucks.
superior ways. I mean, ideally, we would have stuck with the original 3.0 system. That was the ideal in the beginning. Stereo was a result of... That was all they could record. That was all they could mass distribute. 3.0 was the original plan. But yeah, no... The ideal is a single speaker, and if you want width, I mean, that's coming from your room. That's coming from reverberation in your room.
So with the Polk Legend L800 towers with their stereo dimensional array design offer a more spacious sounding mono experience. Why don't you just get dipoles?
Yeah.
And put them up front? That's what I would do. If you really want this more spacious experience, just get straight up dipoles.
Or
just get like a Magnapan, that has no back and that thing's just vibrating back and forth.
Well, Magnapan, I mean, that's...
Not Magnapans. What's the other one? Martin Logan.
Martin Logan, too. I mean, that's going to give you the really razor-sharp phantom center image. Something like DefTech, I think, is what you want. You want the drivers that are firing out the back of the speaker and reflecting all over your front wall.
Magnapans, isn't it Magnapans that have just the grill thing that comes up that looks like a speaker grill?
Yeah, but when you've got Magnaplanar or electrostatic, you tend to get the crazy phantom center image because they've got no sidewall reflections whatsoever.
Right, you just get the back wall is what you get.
It's like headphones. The left speaker only plays to your left ear and the right speaker only plays to your right ear. So
But you also see speakers that are like a single piece of plexiglass with drivers mounted in them, and that gives you that same sort of thing.
Baffle back.
The open baffle back will give you that same sort of thing.
I think DefTechs are probably more what he wants. The bipole design with the actual active drivers on the backs of the speakers firing into the walls. If the stereo dimensional...
that look like Dialects. What do those look like?
If the stereo dimensional array of the Polk Legends actually work the way they claim, it's the complete opposite of what you're acting for, Carrie. This is where they're trying to control the sidewall reflection to eliminate it with the stereo dimensional array so that the left ear only hears the left speaker and the right ear only hears the right speaker, exactly like an electrostatic. That's what the stereo dimensional array is trying to do, but with dome speakers. So that is the opposite of what you're asking for, of trying to make mono sound like it's wider and has, more breadth to the sound within the room. You're going back to the headphone sound where it sounds like it's in between your ears inside of your head, if the stereo dimensional array actually works. Yeah.
There's some Bang & Olufsen ones, too. I can't find the ones I'm thinking of that look like Dialects, that are like these big round things where the tweeter file is straight up into like a weird thing, and they have... Well, anyways. But Bang & Olufsen have those... Unique drivers, I think is what they were called.
KEF is Unique.
That's KEF. Oh, dang it. The BO sound something. I can't find them right now. I'll find them, but they essentially look like those ashtrays they put outside of like before you go into a supermarket. They kind of look like it looks like a cone, and they have the tweeter that fires up, and it's sort of directional, but it's not very directional. And those are meant to be more, dispersed than regular speakers. And you could try something like that, which would be very similar to what he's talking about with the DefTech. It's just. Yeah,
I don't think you can get Mirage anymore where the speaker's fired up. I don't think those are around anymore.
I thought, they had the one with I know what you're talking about. Those are, you can finally find those too. There you go. How many questions? This is too big. So I guess we'll do one more and then we're going to be done because I got stuff to do.
Okay.
Jason has a Marantz SR7011 receiver. He's having an issue with both the front left and right channels. One channel or the other will intermittently go quiet. Sometimes one or the other will completely drop and go silent. It happens more regularly on one side versus the other, but it's happened on both sides. The other speakers continue working, so the receiver is not going into protection mode. It happens occasionally with all types of sources, analog, optical, or HDMI, so it isn't specific to one source. He tried swapping the left and right speakers, Martin Logan Motion 40 towers, since it happens more frequently on one side, to see if the problem remained with one of the speakers, but it didn't. So it seems to be a problem with the receiver. Any thoughts on what could be the cause? boy, I checked those speaker wire connections because those are right next to each other on that. They're usually right next to each other on the back of the receiver. It kind of feels that way, though. The fact that it doesn't go into protection mode is a little concerning.
And that it's not necessarily dropping to silence, that sometimes it's just going quiet. Which is weird.
Bizarre. Yeah, so if you haven't... the first thing I would do is dust the back of my receiver and check my speaker wire connections back there. And then I would call Marantz if they didn't fix it. Because it could be internal, but I've never heard of this. And then I've been in this business a long time. Yeah,
this is a very unusual one. This isn't any of exactly the way that he's described it. It's not any of the common things that I can think of if it's exactly the way that he described it here. This does sound like it could be a malfunction in the receiver. It definitely could be. This is one that I wouldn't really hesitate to call Marantz and inquire about this one. This is a very unusual one. I don't really know what it could be. That's a really strange one.
It would have to be, if it was something like what we normally see, it would have to be like the world's gentlest short. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but even that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make I don't know. It's very strange. It's very strange. So he pre-ordered the Yamaha RX A6A since it will have all the feature he wants, assuming they deliver the promised firmware. That's a big assumption. He's only ever had Denon Marantz before, so when setting things up with YPAO RSC with multipoint, does he position the microphone in exactly the same way as he did with Audyssey? Is mic position number one still the most important and still dead center in the listening area, even if there isn't actually a seat there? The answer to that is yes. Yamaha will take you through this. It will be different because they have the little Nerf Frisbee thing, the three-pronged Frisbee thing. So you'll be placing it like a bunch of different places within that Frisbee and then moving the whole kit and caboodle someplace else and doing other stuff. But they walk you through it just like, I don't know that they have the on-screen walkthrough that Denon Marantz has, but they have it written down and it's like pretty clear because I did it and I'm usually one to get lost in such things.
The A6A being brand new, they also have the new Yamaha Setup app that has the entire wizard that really walks you through step by step. So I highly recommend it. The app for it is free, so it doesn't cost you anything extra. You put that on there and go through the wizard with it, and if you can't follow that, we can't help you explaining it verbally on the podcast.
Yeah, really, we're not going to help you.
It really is as good as it gets, just going step by step through the app. So I totally recommend it. But yes, the overall sense of what you'll be doing with the YPAO setup versus Audyssey, it is very similar, but you will have the little triangular disc that comes with it, and it just informs you. So put it on this position of the disc here. Okay, that measurement is done. Now put it on this part of the disc. Now put it on this part of the disc. So it walks you through it step by step, but then you'll move the entire tripod setup over to another position, exactly like you do with Audyssey. Yeah. Now, the one thing that might be a little bit confusing, I haven't gone through the entire wizard on Yamaha, so I don't know if they tell you move it to the next adjacent seat, if they use that word, you sometimes
still keep it within like 18 inches.
Still keep it
your first location.
Within a radius of 1.5 to 2 feet, exactly like you do with Audyssey. So all of the microphone suggestions that we have for Audyssey, they definitely apply to YPAO as well.
So Yamaha's dual subwoofer settings are a bit different than Marantz. If you have dual subs, which he does, there are options in the menu to designate them as left plus right, front plus rear, or mono times 2. Physically, his subs are at the front and back of the room, but he's guessing you should actually use the mono times 2 option. What do we say? That's what we say.
Yeah, I really wish the left plus right and the front plus rear didn't exist, because the way that Yamaha does it is the worst way that you could implement those settings, which is that if you set it, particularly the front plus rear, if you set it to front plus rear, the front sub only plays with the front speakers.
Yeah.
And the rear sub only plays with the surround and the surround back speakers. They don't play together, which is what we want them to do. Now, what is nice is since they have that mono times 2 option, you don't need a Y splitter. You can use the two subwoofer pre-outs on the Yamaha as an internal Y splitter, as a mono signal, and that is exactly what we want. So in a way, it's a little bit nice. I wish that were the only option was double mono, but that is for sure the one to use.
All right. Who do we got left?
We got lots. We got Bertrand in Quebec, who's got some more questions. We've got Patrick P, Dave B, and Jason S. There we go.
right.
That is who is left. And first up next week.
All right. I want to thank our 128 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon.com is the place where you can go to sign up to become a contributing listener to our podcast. Every month, I'll take some money from you and give the rest of it to us. Most of it to us, at least. So thank you to our 128 patrons, including Daniel and Marc.
Yes, patreon.com/AVRant podcast. For anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, think of it as a voluntary subscription, if you please. So a big thank you to our 128 patrons over there, and Daniel and Marc. Thank you for being two of them.
So I want to thank some people for sending us notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during a pandemic. Ted, Jorge, Jack, Marc, Shannon, Jay, Gurinder, and Bertrand, thank you very much. And we will keep plugging along as long as we can.
Ted, Jorge, Jack, Marc, Shannon, Jay, Gurinder, and Bertrand. Really do appreciate the notes of gratitude from you and just the continued support, the continued enthusiasm. A big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
That's right. If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.